The terminal had never glowed purple before. In 20 cycles of service as station coordinator, I had memorized every color this system could produce. Green meant clearance. Yellow meant delay. Red meant denial. These were the three pillars of galactic intake processing. Clean. Logical, absolute. Purple did not exist in the doctrine. Purple was reserved for errors so catastrophic that the algorithm itself collapsed inward, unable to categorize what it was seeing, unable to decide whether to sound an alarm or simply give up entirely. And yet there it was. 3 slow blinks of red. Then that impossible unclassified shade settled across my screen like a bruise, steady and waiting. I leaned forward until my secondary eyes could sharpen the text. My primary pair refused to cooperate. Some part of my biology had apparently decided that whatever was on that screen, it did not want to process it. Species human, combat aptitude. Tier 9. Threat classification. Alpha predator. My claws pressed hard into the console edge. Coordinator Krell. My assistant Vina appeared in the doorway. Her neck frills shifting through a careful turquoise, alert, not yet alarmed. She had the expression of someone who had come to check on a colleague and was beginning to regret the decision. You have been completely motionless for 11 minutes, she said gently. Medical is wondering if you've entered a stress-induced stasis. I could not find words immediately. Instead, I gestured toward the screen with the slow, defeated movement of someone surrendering to bad news. Vina, I said. Come here, read this. Read it slowly. She crossed the room and stood beside me. I watched her scales as the text registered. Curious green bleeding into startled orange within seconds. Combat conditioning score, she read carefully. Off the measurable scale, she paused. Reaction speed, 98th percentile among all known predator species. Another pause. Longer this time. Assigned cohort. Her voice dropped. Basic orientation. Group 12. Her frills collapsed completely flat against her neck. Krell, she whispered. I know. Group 12 has a plebeian floral. A ranger who loses consciousness when doors close too loudly. I know. I pulled up the intake summary and felt the dread deepen with every line. The situation had not merely been mishandled. It had been mishandled with extraordinary efficiency by a system that had done exactly what it was designed to do and produced a result that should have been impossible. The intake algorithm had seen the words humanitarian, medical aid worker. It had processed them, matched them to a civilian profile, and filed the applicant accordingly. It had never looked deeper. It had never needed to before. She arrived on a cultural exchange visa, I said. Vina stared at the screen. Occupation listed as medical volunteer. The silence between us carried weight. The algorithm read the keywords. I muttered. It saw aid and medical and humanitarian, and it drew a straight line to low-threat civilian. It never questioned why someone in that category had bone density 3 times the predicted human average. Scrolled further, each new data point landing like a stone dropped into still water. Muscle fiber composition flagged as military grade. Neural response latency rivaling apex. Predators bred specifically for warfare across generations. Vina's voice came out very small. How did she behave during intake screening? I found the observation notes from the processing officer and read the relevant line aloud. Exceptionally polite. Apologized twice for the inconvenience of biometric scanning. The silence that followed was existential in quality. Vina's frills twitched once. Then again. What do we do? I stood, my tail moving across the floor in tight, agitated arcs. Group 12's first session. Combat fundamentals. Entry level, designed for beings who had never once considered that their bodies could be used as instruments of force. Was he? Beginning in 38 minutes. Instructor Bricks would be teaching them how to hold a training rod without dropping it. The plebeian would probably need a break halfway, through simply from the stress of being in a room with equipment. We observe, I decided. No intervention, not yet. If this is a system error, the session will reveal it quickly. And if it isn't an error, I exhaled slowly through both sets of lungs. Then we pray that nothing startles her. The observation deck above training hall. 5 offered a clear view of everything below, and 38 minutes later I stood there wishing it did not. The 18 recruits of Group 12 had gathered in the hall the way civilians always did, in nervous, species-specific clusters, staying close to those who looked most like themselves, finding comfort in familiarity. The plebeian floral arranger stood near the far wall, his petal head trembling faintly, doing his best to take up as little space as possible. 3 Quillix recruits pressed together in a tight bundle, their large rabbit-like ears rotating at every ambient sound. 2 Matherian scholars gripped their datapads with both hands, as though the devices were anchors keeping them from drifting away. And then there was the human. She stood slightly apart from the others. Not isolated. The distance felt chosen rather than imposed. Comfortable rather than exclusionary. Her hands were clasped loosely behind her back. Her name tag read Dakota Reeves. Average height for her species. Dark hair pulled back in a tight functional arrangement. Standard gray training attire that on any other recruit would have looked like exercise clothing. On her, it looked like a containment measure that hadn't quite decided whether it was adequate. She was smiling. Soft, open, genuinely warm. It made something beneath my scales feel deeply uneasy. The hall doors opened. The sound alone, a heavy, resonating clang of reinforced metal, made several recruits flinch backward. The plebeian made a sound I had no species classification for. Instructor Brix filled the doorway. Nearly 3 meters of Gorlan biology, stonehide scarred by decades of active combat, a presence that operated less like a person entering a room and more like weather arriving. Even recruits who had spent years in professional environments that required composure tended to shrink when Brix walked in. It was involuntary. It was biological. It was, he had once told me, the entire point. Most of Group 12 shrank. Dakota Reeves looked up with what could only be described as interest. "Welcome to Combat Fundamentals," Brix announced, his voice filling the hall completely. "Most of you have never considered violence as anything beyond an abstract concept. That changes in this room. You will develop awareness. You will develop basic defensive instinct. By the end of this course, you will be capable of holding a standard training implement without causing yourself harm." He paced, heavy footsteps. Deliberate rhythm. Fear rippled through the group in visible waves. Dakota listened with the focused attention of a student who genuinely respected the person speaking. Brix moved to the equipment rack and lifted a padded training rod with one hand. "This is not a weapon," he said flatly. "It is a training aid. Padded, balanced, designed to be safe in the hands of beings with no prior combat experience." He scanned the room. "You will not swing it. You will not attempt to spar. You will not improvise. Is that understood?" A collection of weak, anxious affirmatives answered him. "Retrieve your equipment. Single file." The line moved forward with the shuffling anxiety of beings who were not entirely sure they wanted to reach the front. Dakota waited at the back. When her turn came and Brix extended a rod toward her, something happened that I nearly missed. He paused. A single moment, barely a fraction of a second, where his eyes registered something and his body went very still. Then he released the rod and stepped back. Dakota accepted it. Her grip settled into place with no adjustment. No repositioning. No searching for the right angle. Thumb placement precise. Tension distributed perfectly along the handle. Balance point centered as though she had reached for it 1,000 times, and her hand simply remembered where to go. "Thank you, instructor," she said warmly. Brix said nothing, but his eyes did not leave her. From the observation deck, something cold moved through me that had nothing to do with the station's climate controls. This was not a calibration error. This was not a system glitch or a formatting misread or a bureaucratic coincidence. Group 12 had no idea what had just walked into their classroom. And neither I was beginning to understand, did we? Instructor Brix did not comment on her grip. That silence said more than any reprimand could have. He moved to the center of the hall and demonstrated the foundational stance, feet at shoulder width, knees slightly bent, the rod held diagonally across the torso in a posture designed for pure defense. It was the most elementary position in galactic combat doctrine, crafted specifically for beings who were encountering these concepts for the first time in their lives. The recruits attempted to mirror him. The results were exactly what Group 12 always produced. One Quillix had the rod reversed. Another was gripping it so tightly that his forelimbs had begun to shake from the effort. The Matherian scholars were tilting their rods at a precise 47-degree angle because they had calculated it mathematically, rather than physically. The plebeian managed somehow to become briefly entangled in the padding and issued a heartfelt apology to the equipment. Dakota Reeves stood motionless. Already correct. Already there. She had not copied Brix's stance. She had simply arrived at it. Weight distributed without thought. Posture settled rather than assumed. Small unconscious microadjustments flowing through her frame, the way a system self-corrects when the environment shifts. There was no stiffness, no visible processing. She simply existed in the position, as though it were the most natural place for her body to be, and waited. Brix moved through the line, correcting with blunt efficiency. "Loosen your grip. You are not strangling prey. Feet wider. You will fall over. Stop apologizing to the equipment." Then he reached Dakota. He stopped. Several full seconds passed in which he simply observed her. "You," he said finally. "Human." "Yes, instructor." "Where did you learn to hold a combat implement?" Dakota tilted her head slightly in a small, genuine gesture of consideration. The look of someone deciding how much truth was appropriate for the moment. "I've worked in unstable regions," she said carefully. "Basic self-defense training was required." "Basic," Brix repeated. The word carried a distinct lack of acceptance. "Yes." He leaned forward, his considerable mass bringing his face within uncomfortable proximity to hers. "Your stance is correct. Your grip pressure is optimal. Your weight is distributed for immediate movement in any direction." He straightened. "Basic training does not produce that." Dakota's smile edged toward apologetic. "My instructors were very thorough. They prioritized safety." Brix stared at her for a moment longer, then moved on. But for the remainder of the session, his gaze kept finding its way back to her. brief and calculating. The look of someone solving a problem they haven't been given all the pieces to, Yet the lesson continued. Foot placement, guard transitions, controlled lateral movement. The civilians worked through the material with varying degrees of difficulty and earnest effort. Dakota moved through it the way water moves through familiar terrain, not performing competence, but simply expressing it, naturally without announcement. She transitioned between positions before Bricks called for them, then caught herself and settled back. She corrected her own angles in ways that suggested not adjustment but memory, and twice when a recruit near her wobbled dangerously. Her hand moved, just slightly, just enough, before she stopped herself and folded it back behind her. She was restraining herself, consciously, carefully, deliberately pulling back from instincts that had been built into her over years of conditioning that had nothing to do with cultural exchange programs. That realization settled in my chest like something with weight. After 40 minutes, Bricks called the session to a halt. Final drill, he announced. Observational only. I will approach each of you. You will maintain your stance. You will not attack. You will not flee. Standard intimidation assessment. Hold your position. What followed was instructive in the way disasters tend to be. The Quilix scattered the moment he took his second step. The Matherian scholars held admirably until he crossed the 1-meter threshold, then retreated with academic dignity. The plebeian fainted. Medical staff moved in with practiced efficiency, which suggested this was not their first Group 12 incident. Dakota watched it all with calm attention, not amusement, not superiority, something closer to quiet concern. The look of someone monitoring a situation for the moment when intervention might become necessary. Then Bricks turned toward her. He closed the distance with deliberate, controlled aggression, the kind cultivated over decades of real combat, designed to activate fear responses at something deeper than conscious thought. It was biological. It was almost impossible to resist. Every recruit felt it the moment he entered their space. Dakota's breathing did not change. Her eyes tracked him with steady, unblinking clarity, not defiance, not aggression, simply focused awareness. She was not bracing for something terrible. She was ready for whatever came next. There is a profound difference between those two states, and every being in the room was experiencing one of them except her. Bricks stopped centimeters from the end of her training rod. The hall was completely silent. "You are not afraid," he said very quietly. "I understand this is a training exercise," Dakota replied. "You haven't indicated hostile intent. And if I had?" The faintest trace of something crossed her expression. Not quite a smile. Not quite a warning. Something balanced precisely between the two. "Then I would reassess my response appropriately." The words were measured, polite, entirely professional. The implication beneath them was another matter entirely. Bricks held her gaze for 3 long heartbeats. Then he stepped back. "Dismissed." Dakota returned her rod with careful precision, nodded respectfully to Bricks, and exited the hall with movements that were controlled and fluid and utterly without wasted motion. Bricks remained standing in the center of the room. Then slowly, he looked up toward the observation deck and made a gesture, a specific, 2-handed Gorlin signal that translated roughly to, "We need to talk, immediately." 5 minutes later he sat across from me in my office. He did not ease into the subject. "That human," he said, "is not a civilian." Vina stood near the door, frills cycling through nervous colors. "Her documentation," I began, "is either incomplete or deliberately constructed to mislead." He leaned forward. "I have trained soldiers for 30 years. I know what operational conditioning looks like. Not academic, not theoretical, operational, the kind built by repeated exposure to situations where the wrong response had permanent consequences." He paused. "Natural talent doesn't erase fear. Training does. She has no fear in that context, because her nervous system was restructured to replace it with procedure." I reopened her file. Humanitarian credentials, medical certifications, diplomatic clearance. Nothing military listed at the top. Nothing that would have triggered a different classification. The response from the Human Coalition arrived faster than I expected. "Classification error acknowledged. Full dossier attached. Handle with discretion." I opened the attachment. Dakota Reeves, Earth Alliance Special Operations. 12 years active service. Multiple commendations. For field conduct and crisis management, retired. Currently, pursuing humanitarian work and cross-species. Diplomatic education. We had placed a predator among prey. We had called it cultural exchange. And she had smiled and apologized for the inconvenience of biometric scanning. Tomorrow, I thought, was going to require a very long meeting. The emergency session convened at first light cycle. Director Morphix presided at the head of the crystalline table, her faceted body throwing sharp, restless patterns of refracted light across the room, a reliable indicator that her patience was already depleted. Bricks sat to one side, immovable. 3 Human Coalition diplomats occupied the other, wearing the expressions of people who had made a long journey to explain something they already knew was indefensible. Ambassador Foster looked as though he had not slept. At the far end of the table, Dakota Reeves sat with her hands folded neatly, calm and still, not restrained, not flanked by security, simply waiting with the composed patience of someone who had spent years in rooms where the atmosphere was considerably more hostile than this one. The conversation moved through explanation, accountability, and institutional embarrassment with clinical efficiency. The algorithm had done exactly what it was designed to do. The human documentation followed Earth formatting standards that listed military service chronologically, within general employment history, rather than flagging it separately. No individual had failed. The system had. That distinction provided very little comfort. She moves like someone who has survived, Brick said. Someone who was attacked, and learned and precisely and permanently on what works. Dakota's eyes moved to him. I am capable, she said, with the careful emphasis of someone correcting a distinction that mattered to them. That is different from being dangerous. The difference, Bricks replied, depends entirely on your choices. Yes, she said simply. It does. Morphix activated the holographic display. A busy station marketplace appeared above the table, filled with movement and ambient noise. Scenario, the director said. You are here. A cargo container falls behind you. Loud noise. Sudden movement. What do you do? Step laterally out of the fall trajectory, Dakota answered without hesitation. Turn toward the sound. Assess for injuries. Check for secondary hazards. Assist anyone who needs it. You don't assume attack? Because it isn't one. The scenario shifted. Two beings in a physical altercation, shoving escalating toward something worse. And here? Create distance. Contact station security. Monitor escalation. Don't intervene unless serious harm is imminent. And if it is? Dakota's expression didn't harden so much as focus. Minimum force. Verbal commands first. Physical intervention only to prevent injury. Proportional and controlled. The room was quiet for a moment. She doesn't deliberate, Morphix observed. Because I've trained for emergencies, Dakota said. Deliberation costs time people don't have. Would you prefer I hesitate? Nobody answered. She leaned forward slightly. With respect, and this feels less like a safety assessment and more like discomfort. You are unsettled because I am competent without being aggressive. Because I don't match the profile you expected. She paused. I came here in good faith. I want to learn. I want to contribute. Effectiveness should not be treated as a liability. It was Vina, quiet in the corner, who broke the silence that followed. What if she isn't the problem? Every face turned toward her. Her frills were glowing, not anxious yellow. Not alarmed orange, but the deep, thoughtful blue she showed when she had arrived at something she believed. Completely, Group 12 is terrified of conflict, Vina said. They associate strength with harm, but Miss Reeves shows something different. Control. Capability, compassion without weakness. She could be a stabilizing presence. A model. She looked at Morphix. She could be exactly what that group needs. Bricks was quiet for a moment. The floral arranger, he admitted finally. He watched her remain calm during my approach. It helped him stay on his feet for 6 seconds. Longer than his previous record. Dakota nodded once. Teaching people to feel safe is part of what I do. Morphix's facets rotated slowly. Then modified placement. Peer mentor. Teaching role. Enhanced oversight. Are you willing? That, Dakota said, is far more useful than pretending I'm a beginner. A sound moved through the room that took me a moment to identify. Quiet, surprise, genuine laughter. 6 weeks later, I stood on the observation deck above Training Hall 5 for the last time that cycle, and my stomach held nothing but warmth. Below me, Group 12 moved. Not with precision, not yet, but with something rarer and more important confidence, the knowledge that their bodies were capable of more than they had believed. When they walked through the door, Thornweave, the plebeian floral arranger who had once fainted at ambient noise, stood upright with his training rod held in careful, deliberate hands. His petals still trembled when something startled him, but he no longer fled. Dakota had spent hours with him explaining that fear was not failure. It was information, data, something to be acknowledged, processed, and worked with rather than surrendered to. The Quillix trio moved independently now, quick and aware, repositioning between exercises with surprising agility. Dakota had reframed their size entirely. Not a vulnerability, but an advantage. Speed, awareness, the ability to read an environment faster than larger species could react to it. The Matherian scholars took notes. They asked questions. They had begun drafting what Ambassador Foster later told me would become a foundational paper on cross-species threat response theory, a paper that would be cited in diplomatic training programs for the next decade. And Dakota laughed. Genuinely, openly, without the careful restraint I had watched her maintain in that first session. The tension that had lived in her shoulders, the constant, quiet work of holding herself back, had softened into something that looked, remarkably, like belonging. Bricks appeared beside me on the railing. She's good, he said. The words came out with the particular weight of a person who does not offer that assessment lightly. Better than half my instructors. Any incidents? None. He watched her below, as she crouched to help Aquilix recruit adjust his footing, speaking quietly. waiting patiently while the small being tried again, held the position, and let out a triumphant sound that carried all the way to the observation deck. Dakota gave an encouraging nod. She stopped 3 panic spirals before they started. Brix continued. Corrected equipment misuse without embarrassing anyone, and somehow convinced Thornweave to complete an obstacle course. He paused. That last one might be her greatest achievement. She actually cares, I said. I thought she might be bored, he admitted. I was wrong. Below us, Dakota glanced up at the observation window. She saw us watching. She raised one hand in a small easy wave, not a salute, not a formal acknowledgement, just the gesture of someone who was glad to be where she was doing what she was doing, among people she had come to consider her own. I waved back. Group 12 graduated 6 weeks later with the highest orientation performance scores in station history. Thornweave transferred into station safety inspection, where his particular sensitivity to environmental change became, his supervisor told me, an unexpected professional asset. The Quillix trio launched a self-defense initiative for smaller species across 3 sectors. The Matherian scholars published their paper. It was received very well. Dakota Reeves completed the cultural exchange program. She joined the diplomatic corps, not as a soldier, not as security personnel, but as a specialist in humanitarian operations within active conflict zones. She spent the next years training relief workers across multiple sectors, teaching them awareness, calm, and the critical distinction between strength and aggression, between capability and harm, between being prepared for the worst and expecting it. I kept her file on my desk after she left, not as a warning, not as a reminder of what could have gone wrong, as a reminder of what happens when the most dangerous person in the room is also the most deliberate, when someone who knows exactly what they are capable of looks at that knowledge and chooses, every single day, what to do with it. The galaxy is full of predators. The rare ones are those who became something more.